Hey folks, today we're going to take a look at a game that is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter. That game is called Alphas, and it's from Kid Loves Tiger Games. Now, if you like what you see throughout the rest of this preview video, I'm going to encourage you to go to the official Kickstarter project page. You can do that at any time by following the link in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. Now, Alphas is a superhero miniatures game using original characters. You and the other players take control of these superheroes called Alphas, and you are, well, there's lots of different things you could be doing. You could be, because there's different game modes. If you are playing in a miniature skirmish mode, each player takes control of a team of Alphas who are going to try and defeat the other players or just meet individual goals. If you're playing in a one versus all mode, one player takes control of the villains and their goon squads and trying to take out the other players who are teaming up together as superheroes. Or you could play as a cooperative mode, which will be in the final version. There's lots of different ways to play this game. One thing that's unique, that is common amongst all of these different game modes, is a huge map with constructible buildings and pieces and lampposts and cars and all these different types of things, as well as high quality miniatures for the Alphas themselves. But before we go any further, let me go ahead and give you a brief look at how the game is played with a prototype version of the game. So do bear that in mind, that what you see in this preview is going to change, of course, in the final version. For instance, there are miniatures that I'm going to show you in the preview section, but they are just prototype miniatures, and even for prototypes, they look pretty good, but you can expect that the final versions are going to look even better. And there's other things here that, of course, are just going to be in prototype form as well. But in any event, once we go through that, then we're going to come back and we will discuss this further. Alphas is a superhero miniatures board game for 2 to 4 players. There are multiple game modes. The primary way to play is skirmish mode, where teams of heroes battle against each other. But there's also scenario mode, where heroes work together either fully cooperatively or against one villain player in preset map layouts. Regardless of the game mode, each player takes control of one or more Alphas working to meet their goals and save or destroy Titan City. Start off by laying out the game mat representing the city. Then populate it with buildings, trees, vehicles, and other terrain. You may do this randomly or decide as a group, or you may use a scenario book to determine the layout. The terrain is not just for show. During the game, objects can be used as cover, picked up, thrown, destroyed, etc. If you're doing a scenario, you may also need to seed the game area with villains, bystanders, and objective markers, sometimes in multiple colors to denote multiple objectives or points of interest. In any mode, you'll also have to place your Alpha miniatures in their designated places. Of course, every player will need their heroes. Decide either randomly or by draft which heroes each player will get. With 20 heroes in the base game and more on the way, there are plenty to choose from. Shown here are prototype miniatures for the Alphas and villains in the game, though the final edition of the game will have even higher quality versions of the miniatures with more expansion content to come. Take special note of dynamic miniatures like Titan, who can change in size. In a skirmish game, each player will need 5 Alphas. Each character card has several stats. Health, energy, and speed are the most important, as well as indicators for the amount and type of dice they roll for attack and defense. All heroes have multiple special powers, some of them passive and always on, and others that require energy to activate. Lastly, all heroes have multiple traits, things like flight, regeneration, super speed, some of which can always be used, and some which must be activated with energy. Every player gets a set of dice. While all of the dice share symbols, the amount of each symbol on each die changes from color to color. The burst symbols indicate hits in combat, and shields indicate defense. There are also critical hits and critical defense, and alpha symbols, which are needed to succeed on certain checks and trigger some special effects. Also, rolling 2 alpha symbols lets you draw an enhancement card from the deck. Enhancements will increase one of your stats or abilities, like giving you more speed, extra dice for attacks or defense, increased range, and more. In a skirmish game, each player has a small activation deck with a card for each of their alphas. Every alpha has a number. The higher the number, the faster the alpha. Each player will shuffle their deck and draw 1 card at the start of the round. Then compare the numbers, and whoever has the highest speed will go first. On their turn, alphas can use their energy to move, use basic attack actions, or activate special powers. Alphas is a dynamic game. Heroes can use extra movement to scale buildings, though alphas with the flight trait will have a much easier time. Alphas can be subject to a variety of status effects, and their powers can have a dramatic effect on the battlefield. Alphas can be knocked out if their health drops to 0, and they become stunned, removed from the battlefield, and lose a turn before returning. Scenarios function differently. One player will control the villainous forces and has a special deck of villain activation cards to draw from, detailing how many miniatures can be activated and what special powers they can use. When every alpha from every player has had their activation, the activation decks of each player are reshuffled and a new round begins. When the game ends depends entirely on the mode you're playing in. In skirmish mode, you'll play a certain number of rounds or to a certain number of points. You'll earn points for different objectives on the map or for defeating your opponents. In a scenario game, the game will end when either the heroes defeat the villains or vice versa. The outcome of a scenario battle can have consequences for future scenarios in the story. For example, the villain player can remove cards from the enhancement deck, or the hero alphas can start the next game with extra enhancements. This is just a taste of what you can expect in alphas, with lots more in store.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious even from that prototype copy. I mean, that was a prototype that you just saw there in the preview, but even that was epic in scale. I mean, that is the very first thing you cannot help but notice about alphas is that they put a lot of effort into the map, and not just the map itself, but and a lot of other games would have just had tiles or a mat and said, that's it, that's all you have. But now you have these large constructible buildings and also on all the different pieces for the terrain itself, all of which is relevant to the game. This is terrain that you need to worry about picking up, throwing, destroying, getting behind for cover, blocking your opponents, things like that, and hampering your movement. There might be hostages on the top of a building, and you need to get your way up that building. If you don't have flight, and some alphas do have flight, or teleportation or something, it's going to be harder for you to get up there. So it is relevant to the game, and that really adds a dynamism, dynamic factor to the game. I tried. Where you really have to be worrying about your terrain constantly at the same time you're worrying about just getting to your opponent or getting to whatever your objectives are. And that's another interesting thing, too. I mentioned in the beginning of this video that there are just multiple different ways. I mentioned during the preview as well. There are multiple different ways to play the game. And the whole aspect of having the objective markers as their own like little miniature, but just as a thing that could take the place of many different goals and objects that you need to get for each of your scenarios. You can make your own scenarios, but there are, of course, the scenario books as well. One of them might be go and rescue the hostages. One of them could be just escort people. One could be here's the MacGuffins, like the classic superhero MacGuffins, like the Infinity Stones, that you need to go and capture. So there's lots of different things, ways to play the game, and of course there is just the skirmish mode of battling out the other players, which if you're a miniature game aficionado, that you'll feel right at home in that mode. And really, the games, the individual alphas themselves lend themselves to any of these modes, because in any mode, you're using the same set of powers, and every alpha is unique. There's 20 characters just in the base game, and of course, if you go to the Kickstarter page, you can see plans for many, many more, and just so much here. Right down, and they did their absolute best to make the characters feel like they have those unique powers. If you are a speedster, you can go before any of the other players, and you can move faster. I mean, you feel fast within as much as you possibly can in a miniatures game. One of the characters, Titan, can actually change their size, and yes, you have different miniatures for that. A tiny miniature, a regular size miniature, a huge miniature. So, there's all these little things that are put into the game to enhance not just the gameplay, but the theme as well. So many high-quality miniatures will be in the final version, along with the terrain pieces, and so many different ways to play the game. It's almost a bit overwhelming. I really couldn't even do it justice with just the prototype copy and just that short amount of time I had for the preview. But hopefully, you got a taste of what will be in that final version. If you like miniatures games, if you love superheroes, if you like both of those things, and you like games that have multiple different game modes, cooperative, one versus all, different ways to play the game, and despite, the theme being an overwhelming presence, it is a tactical strategy game. There's a lot of different things you have to worry about, things to plan, different abilities to take into effect, and you have to work together or work against each other in very real and strategic ways. So if any of that appeals to you, look, don't take my word for it. Go to the Kickstarter page. There's so much information there. You can do so by following the link in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. And hopefully, after seeing that, you will consider backing the project. That is Alphas from Kid Loves Tiger Games. Thank you so much for watching and for supporting our sponsors. As always, take care.